Hello, bonjour, buenos dias. My name is James Milner. I'm a professor of political science at Carleton University, which is on unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa, Canada. It's my real privilege to be the project director for LEARN, the Local Engagement Refugee Research Network. This is a partnership between researchers, civil society partners, and refugee leaders in Canada and in other parts of the world, but especially focused on the needs and opportunities that are identified by our partners in East Africa and the Middle East. Through research, training, capacity sharing, policy engagement, and public dialogue, we're working to better understand and enhance the role of civil society in the functioning of the global refugee regime. And in this context, it's a real privilege to partner with Canada's International Development Research Centre, IDRC, and the network of chairs in forced displacement to host this webinar series. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work and on which Carleton is located is the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I say this not only out of protocol and courtesy, but out of a deep respect and an appreciation that these issues of dispossession and dislocation that we talk about in this webinar today are very much part of the history of the land on which I live and work. But also in discussions about climate change and the environment, we recognize that the traditions of stewardship that have been passed down through generations, time immemorial, from the First Nations communities in the area where I live, hold important lessons for the conversations that we have today. With that, let me just say how delighted I am to welcome some 85 registrants from around the world who are joining us for this webinar. Before we begin, let me share some practicalities and netiquette before I introduce our moderator, who is with us on the screen. First, let me share that the webinar is supported by interpretation between English and Spanish. So I will try to I was going to try and say that in Spanish, but it's better that I don't even begin. To access interpretation, where you go, utilice la función de traducción en la parte interior de la panelata para acceder la interpretación. There's an interpretation button that you will find at the bottom of the screen. We have speakers today, both in English and in Spanish. My thanks to the interpreters for providing this really essential support. And let me acknowledge the need to move beyond the hegemonic status of English in research on forced migration. If we are to truly benefit from the diversity of perspectives, we need to find more meaningful and lasting solutions. So thank you. Second, please note this webinar is in the view-only function. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to pose your questions, which the moderator will ably curate in the second half of the webinar. Please be respectful in posing your questions in the Q&A box. Inappropriate behavior or the use of hurtful or hateful language will lead to your removal from the webinar. So please be considerate of the moderator and the speakers and respectful of the opinions of others. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please send us an email to learn@carleton.ca. Email address appears on your screen. We'll be able to help you out. And also, please join the conversation on the platform formerly known as Twitter by tagging either @learning or @FDChairsNet. And finally, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the website of the IDRC research chairs in the coming weeks. So please visit the chair's website to learn more about this webinar, to read the report when it's available, and to learn more about the activities of the network itself. So we hope you enjoy this webinar. I'm looking forward to the conversation and learning from the wonderful speakers that we have. And now it's my real pleasure and delight to turn proceedings over to our moderator, Dr. Felina Freya. Many of you know Feline and her work. I'll just introduce her very briefly before passing things over. Feline was the inaugural IDRC research chair at the Universidad del Pacífico in Lima, Peru. Her research is centered on migration and refugee policies and law in Latin America, with a particular focus on South-South migration and the Venezuelan displacement. She's really made significant contributions both in academic spaces, but in media discourse, and with her work appearing in a wide range of outlets, both academic and policy focused. She's a real treasure, and I always learn so much from her work. She's a very innovative scholar and a wonderful colleague, and I'm just delighted that we have her moderating this webinar. So, Felina, with that, over to you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias. Go ahead, Felina.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be moderating this session, which is extremely timely, not only because of the very real effects of climate change, environmental disasters, and extreme weather, as we've seen in recent weeks across the world, and especially for the most vulnerable populations, and thus also being a big driver of displacement, but also leading to situations of forced immobility across the world. And on the other hand side, due to the current political climate that doesn't make research, data collection, and activism in this area easy at the moment. With that, it's my honor to introduce our speakers. So we'll have 4 wonderful speakers. First of all, the opening remarks by Andrew Harper, who is the Special Advisor on Climate Action to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva. Thus, he is responsible for providing strategic guidance, oversight, and expertise to shape UNHCR's response to climate emergencies. And with that, the aim of ensuring not only adequate policies, but also that the voices and concerns of forcibly displaced people themselves are included in these responses. So it is wonderful to have you with us, Andrew. He furthermore has a vast amount of experience dealing with specific crises, including the Syrian displacement crisis, refugee crisis, as well as the Iraq situations, and also emergencies in the Middle East and Northern Africa. After Andrew, we'll hear from Oportuna Cueca, who is the IDRC chair at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography within the College of Social Sciences and has decades of experience researching the implications of changes in the environment and in climate for the livelihoods of displaced people and refugee policies in Tanzania. As a third speaker, we have Desiree del Rosario Sosa joining us from the Dominican Republic. She also heads the IDRC Research Chair in the Dominican Republic at the Instituto Tecnológico de Santo Domingo. And Desiree brings to the table today an experience that has started out as being an educator, starting her career as a primary school teacher in the 1980s, and then making her way through a very inspiring academic journey, completing her PhD in law from the Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo, and today, as I mentioned, directing the IDRC Research Chair at the Instituto Tecnológico. Last but not least, we also have Amal El Wasif joining us from Morocco. Amal was the founding director of the IDRC chair at the Polytech University in Morocco. She's currently serving as International Relations Specialist at the Policy Center for the New South and brings to the table and the discussion today a vast experience working for different institutions, including the Westminster Foundation for Democracy and also the German Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GITS, in Morocco. So that said, I will now pass the microphone to Andrew for his opening remarks. Every speaker will have 10 minutes. After that, we will have a first round of discussions, and we will also leave enough time for your questions. So please, as listeners, as the audience, you can, as James explained, post your questions in the chat, and we will come to them in the second round of the discussion after the presentations. Thank you very much. And Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you, James, for the opportunity to talk today. The it might seem a bit strange when we're looking at the title of the presentation, the Global South Perspectives on Climate Change and Displacement. I'm in Geneva and I'm Australian, so I'm possibly not necessarily the best person to talk about it. But what I will try and do is bring the views, the points, the experience that we have been able to gain from years of dealing with displaced persons and bring them to the fore. Just yesterday, we had a meeting with member states of UNHCR's executive committee, and this is quite interesting because member states are actually asking for UNHCR to include as part of their executive committee conclusions a statement or recommendations on climate action. So something which was seen as open for negotiation and discussion has become almost mainstreamed, that they're seeing this as a critical part of UNHCR's discussions. So if we can just put on the presentation so we can push through in the allotted time. Next, please. I think when we look at displacement, people often sort of say a risk multiplier or a threat multiplier. No, climate change and the elements related to it is a vulnerability multiplier. People are not a threat. They're not a risk. They they wish to remain within their communities. They want to have a dignified and secured not only life but future for their children. But what climate change is doing is it's driving the underlying weaknesses and vulnerabilities of communities and societies around the world to such an extent that in many cases people are driven out. Next, please. And it's not necessarily just a simple climate equals displacement. There's so many other elements which go into play here and which need to be taken into account when you're dealing with research, when you're dealing with governments, when you're dealing with any interlocutor. And so the degree and let's say the weight of any of these elements depends on the context, depends on the area, depends on the society. You can't get away from the fact that in many areas, populations are growing at a high rate, and the carrying capacity of the land is being diminished, leading to land degradation in places like Burkina Faso or Niger or other places. We know that climate change is leading to increased heat, but we also know that poor agricultural practices is leading to increased food insecurity. And if you're in places like Somalia or in places where there's conflict, you've also got blockages in terms of getting food to market. So agriculture combining with low water supply, increasing unpredictability of water flows is all having an impact, but it differs in terms of what areas. Um, One of the questions that we've also got in terms of this presentation today is learning from local knowledge. True and super important, but probably we also need to take into account that the future is going to be vastly different to the past. And we need to support the adaptation of those communities who are most at risk. Support their adaptation in order to ensure that what is it that they wish to do, achieve in the future? Maybe it is movement. Maybe it will be a situation of migrating to other locations before they're forcibly displaced. Next, please. So, one thing which we can point to is that 3 out of 4 of the world's displaced persons have originated from countries that are already extremely or highly fragile in terms of climate. We're also seeing that 70% of those people who have voluntarily repatriated back to their countries are returning to countries that are also being impacted by climate change. And what does that mean? In many aspects, it means that they're returning back to a society, a community, which is vastly different to the one which they left, but which will not necessarily support their future, which will then mean that they will probably have to move further afield again. We're not seeing the funding that is required in the most fragile states. We are seeing adaptation financing, mitigation financing, other types of climate-related financing, continuing to be focused in, and it's probably not surprising, continue to focus and be prioritized in areas which are stable, middle income, and which can offer returns. This is not necessarily the cases or the countries which have got the greatest vulnerability. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to bring evidence and data to the fore in order that we can justify that those communities who are most at risk, and I'm not just talking about refugees and internally displaced persons, but I'm also talking about those communities that are actually hosting refugees, so that they build up their resilience and adaptive capacity in which to continue to provide that protection. Because if we do not protect the environment, then it's very difficult for these populations to continue to protect those people who've displaced. Next, please. I won't go through it too much here, but just to acknowledge that the people who are most vulnerable are those people who have often been already displaced by conflict or who have had to remain through a conflict. What we are seeing is that those populations who are most vulnerable are being hit again. And there is an increasing exacerbation between the let's say the vulnerability and the weakness of those populations and more resilient populations. So we need to try and reorient funding and support to countries that need it most. Next, please. Next, please. So these stats are probably not that surprising, but it's just to demonstrate that what we're seeing at the moment is only going to deteriorate further. Next, please. We're working with entities around the world, including the world's best think tanks and academics, on trying to model where climate change and extreme weather events will impact populations severely. And I'll wrap it up in a couple of minutes. But just to, if you look at the populations here who are being currently exposed to critical heat, we've got 5 million suffering severe and 2 million suffering extreme heat. But by 2040, next please. By 2040, the number is going to increase to 31 million plus 43 million. And this is not even taking into account population growth. This is just based on current populations. So we have got a responsibility to look at data and look at evidence and ensure that communities and decision makers are aware of what will be coming down the road in terms of heat exposure. And again, if we're talking about heat, we're also talking about viability of crops, livelihoods, access to water, and so forth. So these are the types of things that we need to be taking into account. And I'll just got one more minute, then I'll wrap up. Next, please. How do we respond? Next, please. It's got to be inclusive. We have to be working with the local communities. We have to be listening to them. And it's not sufficient just to have participation. Populations that are being impacted need to be included in the decision making. And we need to be working with finance institutions, not just looking at short-term emergency responses, but investing in adaptation and resilience. And overall, we also need to be ensuring that the policies and legal frameworks are put in place to provide that, that security and that coverage. There's much more. There is a PowerPoint presentation which goes on for a bit longer, but I will leave it at that, and people can access the PowerPoint and feel free to ask any questions after this. Over.
Thank you so very much, Andrew, for this wonderful opening presentation, which gives us so much food for thought already and material for further discussion. So with that, we hand the microphone over to our second speaker, Opportuna, please.
A research that we have conducted in Tanzania, mostly on climate change and displacement. We work in East Africa, but most of the work that I will present today is from Tanzania. The first thing that we have learned is that climate change is not an external thing to the society, as many of the approaches to deal with it have been trying to do. So different scholars have talked about how it has been made an external thing and how this conceptualization has actually complicated the process of adaptation and leading to further production of climate change. So this has also made the Global South wait for policies which are constructed outside their context and not fitting the climate change challenges. I'm using the concept of socio-ecological system in order to put back climate change into the society and ask for documentation of successful ways in which the Global South has been adapting and making systems such as food production system continue and able to function, that is resilience and actually ensuring food security. So climate change has been part and parcel of many of the structural factors that the Global South is facing and bringing a number of challenges. And this has been one of the challenges of showing clearly the linkage between climate change and displacement. So we talk of core causes. That means the integration or interwoven of a number of factors, structural factors from political, socioeconomic, demographic, and environmental factors. I think there's a model by Myers, if I remember, which has also identified some of these factors and also meso-level factors, looking at political, social, diaspora, and also individual level factors such as age, gender, sex, etc. So a lot of efforts has been on definition and struggle to define the category climate-induced displacement, and this has been challenged to be maybe it's an effort to create a new category of refugees. As we know already, the way refugees are facing challenges in the Global South and the protractedness, increasing in number, and also declining in support. However, we have some regional frameworks which have been talking about climate-induced and talk of climate-induced displacement as IDPs, the Kampala Convention and other models. So there have been countries like Uganda which have been trying to actually put some of those who are displaced due to climate change in areas which are called camps, similar to what we do in the refugees. But I think probably that we need to rethink that model. I'm agreeing with the definition, I think, which was put by Myers on climate-induced displacement, because I think partly is to define who these people are people who are moved because they have lost their livelihood and their social system are no longer able to support them. And this is what I see in the case of the Maasai nomadic pastoralists whose livelihood or economic system is actually very much interwoven with the cultural and the social system. We try to establish some evidence from census data in Tanzania, 2022 census data. And here I'm just reading some of the evidence that we can draw from the census data, even though I'm arguing that it's also not a very well captured, and we need to try to mainstream it further, the issue of whether how much climate change is contributing to displacement. So between 41% to 88.9% of the regions, all the regions in Tanzania, of the villages, talked about increased temperature, decline rainfall, and sea level rising. So as high as 88.9%. So you can see that. And most of these regions, because this data is collected in the village, at the village level, it's the village leader who is answering. Most of them are actually above 50%. But drawing from migrants' narratives as well, you can see that they talk about factors which are related to climate change, such as looking for pasture, 75%. This is a cumulative percent from all the regions. Suitable land for agriculture, 24%. Search for suitable site for fishing, 0.7%, and running conflict, insecurity, and natural disaster, 0.8%. We also look at the national panel survey data, which is funded by the World Bank, and compare wave one, which is 2008, 2009, and the second wave in Tanzania, which is 2020, 2021. All of them show % increase in drought and floods by region in the past 13 years. The reason for migration are also captured in this national panel survey data, and ranges from the reasons related to climate change, ranging from disease or crop failure, up to 20.3%. Livestock died 16.0 up to 16.0% in some cases, and decline in some regions, and in decline agriculture up to 21.1%. But we are saying there's a need to improve this data collection in both census data in order to capture well lost force due to climate change, because I think there's a lot of displacement, migration or displacement that is occurring between villages and between wards, and this data is only by regions. I have not checked the data on by districts. So it's very important to understand in the Global South the drivers and triggers of the climate change, because in some cases climate change is a driver, but also it's also a trigger in other cases where there are other structural factors or underlying reasons which are causing climate displacement. And if you are not careful, we may be actually addressing wrong issues. So drawing from several cases and show how really they are different on the ground, and that we need not to apply, I would say, cookie cutter kind of adaptation or intervention or mitigation measures, but focus on the differences between these places and be able to capture really the triggers. So the first is the case of the location of the refugee camps, where I've written about now the link between durable solution and sustainable durable solution, where these camps are located very close to the forest, and there are evidence from even satellite image on deforestation. And we have recommended cooperation between humanitarian agencies and forest agencies, even those that are not working in the climate change or outside the camp. This is partly caused by the way the funding stream is made, and we're also calling for the funders to consider this, because at the lower level, the manifestation shows that there's a need to operate not in our own mandate in silos, but in cooperation. The second case is the case of the nomadic pastoralist of Maasai origin, which I've worked since 1998. Where some of the drivers include the history of land loss and marginalization, but in which they talked about structural factors such as large-scale investment, promotion of farming over livestock keeping, wildlife corridors, failure to acknowledge and protect indigenous knowledge systems of livestock keeping. But the trigger and actually invasive species and non-edible grasses, which led to loss of their cattle, and most of the Maasai were now seen in urban area. And this is the research I focus on their reason for movement and their plans, their future plans. But more recently, I think we have heard about the relocation from Ngorongoro to Msomera, with the reason that the way of life of the Maasai, the number is increasing, the number of cattle, and that they're degrading the environment. But we think that there's a need to do research in this area to show clearly what is degrading, and how is that linked clearly to the presence of the Maasai or the pastoral way of life. Part of this, I think this process of relocation has been halted because, and when we talk to some of the pastoralists, they talk about lack of enough information, lack of involvement in decision-making, and lack of transparency. Even some of us who are doing research, somehow the way this issue of relocation started, it was not very clear on what evidence were established and how, and to warrant, of course, the relocation. Of course, we know there was a trigger of fund, but we're not very sure where the fund came from. So we also followed Maasai pastoralists who have relocated recently now, apart from those in 1999 in the urban areas. And some of these plan to restore their livelihood, the cattle economy, and return home, but they fail because of vulnerability and become permanent migrants in urban areas. But there are some social systems of supporting themselves, and we're thinking maybe intervention can be done around supporting these systems, which support some of them to even return, visit their wives and children, even when they don't have a job in the urban areas. There are also rangeland improvement in the pastoral areas, but it is not, there's no research that has shown how, to what extent this rangeland improvement has induced return movement. But we are looking forward to, because this research is actually ongoing. The third case is the case of flood-prone area in Msimbazi in urban Dar es Salaam, where people living in these areas, again, you can say vulnerable to the flood, but also they are mostly low income earners who work very much in the largest market called Kariakoo. In the past, the government has tried to resettle them, but they have returned because I think that there was no consideration of where do they get their livelihood, and therefore they failed because they depend on this market for their livelihood. And today there's a plan for a large-scale recreational project where people are compensated, but they refuse the compensation because they say it's small, and because this project that is planned there is going to be very valuable, and that they think that they should actually be compensated fairly or substantially. The other case is the case of the Sukuma pastoralists who are self-settled in Makuyuni village in Kigoma region. This maybe could be a successful case. They have land, they're settled in the village, but if care is not taken, these people are continuing with a livelihood system that is also already there evidence of deforestation around the areas where they live because of that kind of livelihood system. But the other thing that we need to do is to promote social cohesion and avoid conflicts in this area where there actually other people are moving to do a different kind of livelihood. And preserve, of course, the environment in this locality. We are also looking to do case of the way government and NGOs are intervene in tree planting, because we think most of these processes have been only planting trees with no things like irrigation plans, and some reports, especially from some of the reports that I've read on some of the NGOs working on in the refugee context, they talk about planting trees, but the failure of those that project because there was no water for the trees. And another NGO where 75% of the trees which were planted did not grow. So we ask about the value for money and actually talk about maybe we should not politicize tree planting. Climate change is really a really problem, and it needs science of ensuring that the trees are actually growing to the level of absorbing the carbon dioxide and taking care of other environmental, providing other environmental services. So we are thinking of taking inventory of which trees grow and which did not grow and why. There has been some laws and policies, but we think there should be mainstreaming of displacement or migrant, climate-induced migrants, because this is not featuring in the National Adaptation Plan or Climate Change Act or Carbon Credit Act. Somehow the Disaster Act is talking about it, but only rely on contribution from people and not showing clearly where the fund will be coming from. And the need to know how to bargain for fund at the global level by calculating, of course, loss and damage of those who are compelled to move and be able to support them and ensure compensation or funding mechanism. And also how to ensure the sustainable mitigation. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Opportuna, and for zooming in from Andrew's excellent macro, more general overview of the issue to really highlighting the importance of local context and local knowledge production. And I think very often this falls through. Opportuna, you highlighted in the beginning that we do speak about both individual and structural reasons for displacement, also in the context of climate change. But I feel that what you were talking about so adequately and importantly, the level of local context and local knowledge lies somewhere in between those two individual and structural factors, and are extremely important to take into consideration, both to understand displacement, but also to develop adaptations and solutions. So now I pass the microphone to Desiree, who will be speaking to us in Spanish. So as explained at the beginning of the seminar, we have the translation tool. And with that, please, Desiree, adelante.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm really happy to have these conversations with you, taking into account the perspective of one of the agents of the Global South, women also, their perspectives, their visions, and most panelists in this case are committed to coordinating the chair on climate change and displacement from the perspective of the Global South. In my specific case, I'm speaking from Dominican Republic. We share our island with Haiti. We are also apart from Puerto Rico, the free state, associate free state of the United States, and we are divided by the Caribbean Sea. Today, I'm going to refer to three issues. First of all, I'm going to speak about the experience of COPs in our island and in Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic signs the corresponding agreements. We are committed publicly to them. However, that commitment is not always honored. The second point I would like to refer is the displacement situation, and UNICEF in Haiti is mentioning the displacements of boys and girls in large amounts. And the third part I will deal with is that in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, we are developing the so-called IDRC research chair network on forced displacement. Dominican Republic was said to have everything in a fair, a tourism fair that took place in Spain. But then, what does having everything means? Because we have faced the earthquake in Haiti. Its president was murdered afterwards, and then there have been several crises. And let's say that this has had an impact on our island as well. So this is a whole disaster. That's why we also want to speak about this situation. As to the first point of the convention, during the first week, the same week in which an agreement was signed in terms of the capital or of the main provinces, speaking about COP29, speaking about the national delegation that attended that COP, and speaking about the commitments that were sort of soft, well, they said Dominican Republic should do this, and then the Dominican Republic state authorizes the building, the construction of a new dam. And that company that was awarded the contract has virtually exhausted water supply in Sanchez Ramirez province in Dominican Republic. And they have also ended up an ancient wealth we have in the Pommier Lomas. And let's say that all those authorizations were sold and negotiated to sell sand for construction purposes. And remember also that mining is a part of the domestic product in Dominican Republic. So these contradictions are there. We sign, we ratify, and then we publicly acquire the commitment. But then we give authorizations, and we assume a culture and a practice which is completely different.
Displacement per se is not recognized. The Ministry for Development and Economy is currently converting. Two institutions are going to merge. It does not recognize the definition of displaced people. In this country, we keep on talking about people who have been affected by the cyclones. We still take into account these events. Rain has changed in Dominican Republic. We have had 2 consecutive Novembers in which the capital of Dominican Republic has been flooded. Also, the idea of the Day of Women that took place at the conference in November, what is said and what is done is contradicting each other. But it's also related to accountability when it comes to protecting the agreements, the perspectives, the ratification of international conventions. And we already know about the devolution process. And we can see here in the picture our mom who is in a truck in Dominican Republic. It is a truck that picks up immigrants. It can happen in their companies, in the place of work where they live. They are picked up in order to be deported. There is a large amount of people who were deported. We were talking about thousands of people, hundreds of people who were deported. It is a concept that is not respected, that is not taken into account, especially in extreme situations, which is the current situation with Haiti. Moreover, IMO and UNICEF released a research recently where they talk about the amount of people who have been displaced. We're talking about 1 million people who have been displaced in Haiti. We are talking about a very high percentage of underage people, which showcases the immediate impact that it has on their lives and what involves them in gangs that are affecting this country. Could you please go to the next slide? It is very ironic in that here we say that we have everything. Yes, we have everything. We have xenophobia, patriarchy, and much more. We also have predatory tourism. We have negotiations with companies that have been authorized by the state's legislation to take advantage, to exploit the island, to carry out practices that are harmful. When it comes to water supply, for instance, in Pueblo Nuevo, a Canadian multinational, this week had military intervention in a place where people were saying, please stop destroying our waters, stop destroying our rivers. Can we go ahead? We're also talking about the contradictions between the state's practices and the practices that are reflected in the agreements and what has been said on a local press. Yesterday, the Minister for the Environment came to our university and he was talking about this demand that universities need to commit, as well as companies, to commit to this new transition. We're not just talking about the budget or the resources that were analyzed during COP29, but there's also the small island countries who mentioned the same. It makes us feel like our voices are being heard. Many of the issues that have been studied, that have been documented, that have been studied are not necessarily being heard by states when it comes to the implementation of policies, of climate change policies, and to work with displaced people. Go ahead, please. Now I'm going to share some elements about a research that was carried out last year. I'm going to address the challenges of a government that states is anti-migration and that does not recognize the concept of displacement. There are no policies, there are no statistics, concrete statistics. According to the ministry, there was a report saying these are the provinces, the municipalities that are at risk, where people might be displaced. And we do have very long stories of people who were entirely displaced due to flooding, who were displaced from their cities due to the river flooding. There are also challenges in terms of these practices, gender perspective, even though it's under regulations, even though we have plans and we have programs, these are not translated into the implementation or taking into account the affected communities. It is only done at the district level. It does not follow what was established at COP29 and what might happen in Germany this year. There are severe issues in the capital, but the consequences are not taken into account. Can you please move to the next slide? Which are related to people who have lost goods, that have lost their homes, that have been transported, taken to places where they don't have proper conditions, like these house that we see in the picture. People that had all the furniture, the clothes, the bed sheets, they were in chaotic, terrible conditions. And this is how they live for years after natural disaster. We can see that it has made them more vulnerable, especially women. Women who continue following traditional roles and that expose them to higher risks. When we collect data, we talk to people, and these people tell us about how they lose their goods and how all of this has changed their perception about how the state protects them, because they say that they never received any sort of aid. They did not see any authorities there to help them, to accompany them. They only saw posters, and that was all. However, in Santo Domingo, the capital, the state gave grants to companies, insurance companies during 2022 and 2023, because many people in Santo Domingo lost their cars due to floods that took place on the 4th of November 2022 and again in 2023. So what was the solution? To finance private companies that offer insurances in order to solve the issues created by this flooding. However, this money does not reach the poorest, especially in near the border with Haiti. There are many people who live there and that work in the sugar cane. Can you move on, please? The burdens that the disproportionate burden that we have already mentioned, as well as gender-based violence. Women not only lose their goods, the safety of a home. They do not have access to basic resources such as water and food. Next slide, please. Can you end in a minute, please? The pre-existing inequalities were also explored. Which services and which resources are there? These access and these services and resources are still limited. It doesn't help people recover mentally or physically. There are so many people who are aging and that are part of this displacement group. However, despite a policy for these people, it hasn't happened yet. If we talk about not recognizing displacement and contradictory practices, allowing mining exploitation, tourism exploitation in Dominican Republic, then and the deportation of Haitians who have been displaced due to violence and natural disasters, as we mentioned, Haiti since 2010. The investment is not enough, and gender perspective is not taken into account. Some analysis took place during COP, but who in the end is spearheading this process? How much is being invested? How coherent are the companies and the state's practices? They have not regulated as they should have in order to prevent the loss of water supply. This affects not only Dominican Republics, but also the entire island. Everything that's happened in terms of exploitation by some companies, that are displacing people. This week, they are suggesting that an entire community must be moved to another place in order to build a dam. To build a dam in a place where people live. In other words, to displace an entire community from their lands where they have been settled for centuries, in order to establish more water pollution. There's also the persecution of workers. And of course, we have open air mining that is authorized in our country. So Dominican Republic has it all. Has it all for whom? What is the protection that people, that women, that displaced people have received? They do not have the protection they require. They have not been recognized. They deserve different policies. And there is another topic, energy production. There are so many agreements that are not met. We're also talking about the commitment of academia, but not all academia in Dominican Republic. It is important to continue expanding, to spread the voices of people, to spread the word about rights, to not remain silent in our country. Thank you very much, Desiree.
And such an important contribution, what we as political scientists would call not only policy gaps in terms of implementation, but discursive gaps, right, between the discourses and official speeches of governments on the national and international level, and then the development of coherent policies in practice. So without further ado, Amal, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Feline, and thank you for the IDRC network for the opportunity to participate in this very important webinar. And I would really pick up from the last sentence that you have mentioned, Feline, on the gap of the discourses, but I would like it to take it to the area of academics and what we lack as researchers attempting to understand the dynamics between climate change and migration. So I would like to point to the fact that why it is really difficult today to act on the nexus of climate change and migration is, first of all, because of the lack of research corpus that is ready to back decision making when it comes to climate migration. Unfortunately, it appears that really climate mobility today is kind of like a subcategory of general migration studies. So it is somehow impacted by the general idea that is advanced in the area of migration in general. There is a kind of dominance of the economic kind of neoclassical school of understanding why migration happens at the first place. So we'll find a lot of research that is done to theorize why would people migrate, being it trying to find better opportunities, being rational, agents looking for better opportunities. But it is really difficult to convince today decision makers that migration is happening for any other reason apart from the specific case of refugees, which is not helpful for the questions of mixed migration, including climate migration. And there's also the legal limitations, and I'm sure anyone who's interested in the topic of climate displacement is aware of the fact that climate migrants appear to be the ones who are forgotten in all big events, whether it be the Global Refugees Forum or the COP. And I was lucky because of being part of the IDRC network to attend the JRF in Geneva, and afterwards also with other partners to attend the COP 28 and 29. And really, we didn't feel that migration or climate migration was actually in the heart of discussions, which is, of course, not not reasonable when it comes to knowing the weight that climate migration is having in the different parts of the world. But what is not helping is the fact that currently the legal categorization of refugees is very clear, and there is no appetite at the international level to extend this category to touch upon other categories of migrants. So I think that from this specific side, there is not a lot of hope for climate migrants to be included in this specific categorization, which actually put them in a situation that they are not included in the protection that is given to refugees per se. And there's also, what does not help is the polarization that there is currently between the scholars working on climate migration. You have the alarmists who would advance discourses that are most of the time criticized because they are merely forecasts and numbers. They're not necessarily representative of what's happening really on the ground. And on the other side, there are the minimalists, including the climate skepticals, to really economists who do not see necessarily that climate is driving massive migration. So, of course, climate migration is an issue of today, not of tomorrow. And I would like to react on what Desiree had also mentioned in her presentation when it comes to really the COP29, in which we've had a lot of hopes, did not really deliver on the expectations. It is true that it sort of consolidated what already existed in COP28 in Dubai, in the sense that it included the vulnerabilities and the vulnerable communities, and that they are entitled to be compensated by the loss and damage fund. But the issue is that the funding that is committed is not enough. It's not even enough for really tackling the basic needs of developing countries, let alone tackling climate migration that does not appear as a subcategory of the loss and damage like other categories like adaptation and mitigation. And this is, of course, this raises a lot of questions on how really the vulnerable communities can benefit from the existence of such funding. So that's also something that is really a bit deceiving when it comes to the outcomes of the COP29. And also the operationalization of this fund and how can the people benefit from it is still a big question to be answered. So unfortunately, we did not see a lot of advances when it comes to the question of climate displacement. And in this regard, I would like to also move to the second part of my presentation that actually touches upon the synergies and partnership that could exist between different institutions in a country like Morocco in order to try to understand climate displacement. Actually, as a think tank, but also as the chair on forced displacement in the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Rabat, we receive a lot of inquiries from different partners to collaborate and work together on the question of climate displacement. But the issue is that we do not have the qualitative data to be able to provide any solid and evidence-based research on this specific topic. We lack the theoretical corpus to build upon. And often we are, let's say, we are faced with challenges when it comes to, having the data to work on. But there are some initiatives that I would like to highlight. One of them was actually the collaboration we are doing with the Social, Economic, and Environmental Council of Morocco. That reached out to us and offered technical assistance to conduct research on climate migration. And we've managed to do a field research in the south region of Morocco. And what was interesting is that even with the means that we've had and really just going into a qualitative research, we were really surprised by the amount of insights we could get from the field, in the sense that one big issue is that usually when it's sudden onset events, there is more willingness from the local authorities to recognize the link between migration and climate change. But when it's slow onset events like droughts, like lack of access to water, it's really difficult to get the acknowledgement from the public authorities. And what was really interesting is that they were very clear with us. They told us that they are aware of the fact that yes, the current climate conditions could have a big impact on migration, but for them as local authorities, it's not necessarily the priority area of action. For them, the priority is to make sure everyone has access to drinkable water, to make sure that that people actually can continue to work in agricultural sectors, but they do not have a cluster that is really dedicated to climate migration, which could be understandable with view to the constraints and difficulties that they are facing and that Morocco is facing within the approach of actually making sure all the population has access to drinkable water. But it was also really important to raise the point that if we do not think of climate migration as an issue of today, and we think it's something that's coming tomorrow, I think that will be too late to be able to plan accordingly, because currently we have some research that is not done by Morocco, but that is done by other international institutions like the World Bank. We already kind of have the mapping of the cities that will be hubs for incoming climate migration, and the authorities, they would have to plan accordingly in order to anticipate the movements of climate migration, and to make sure that these people who come into the new cities can be welcomed with the suitable public services. So that was something that really also came in the research. And of course, we had the opportunity to organize in Morocco, in Rabat, with the support of IDRC, the South-South Climate Summit on climate migration. And we discussed about the different findings that came from the field study, including the fact that women appear to be even more at the forefront from climate adverse effects when it comes to their employability, because most of the time it's actually about intersection of vulnerabilities, the fact that they are already in positions and employment positions that are a little bit less valued than the men's position, and the fact that when the opportunities to work in agriculture are becoming less available, they are prone to accept harsher working conditions. They are also becoming victims of harassment. So all these things would have to be taken into account. And I think that what would be really important for us as researchers is to try to come up with not necessarily modelization, but at least approaches that could convince the decision makers, because they are interested into knowing what's going on, but they need to have let's say, an organized and structured approach for them to accept the existence of climate migration as an issue of today, and to be able to make their decisions based on findings that are really rooted in a sort of structured approach to the issue. And I think that the what we already do in the IDRC chairs, with also the networks that we have with different organizations, is a good starting point for us, but definitely there will be need for more activities and research with this regard. I will stop here, and I'll be happy to add more elements on the social and economic aspects of climate migration in the specific case of Morocco, because it's the case on which I work specifically.
Thank you so much, Amal. With a view to the time, I suggest that I make use of my privileged position as moderator and pose an additional question to each of you. And in the case of Andrew, I'll also incorporate the question by Abi Wajizi. At the same time, it's my invitation to the audience to pose additional questions, and I'll incorporate them in the discussion. So Amal, I won't let you off the hook. You mentioned the long-term social, economic, and cultural impacts of climate change on displaced populations. You also highlighted the scarcity of data and information, but from your research, from your knowledge, and specifically in the case of Morocco, but maybe even beyond that, could you reflect on these long-term effects and maybe also summarize some of what we heard in the other presentations, sorry. Thank you.
So one of the long-term effects of climate displacement that emerged from the study we've done is, as I mentioned earlier, the impact on women. Actually, women as men and as other categories, they are prone to look for alternatives when the employment that they used to do is no longer possible. But these alternatives are not necessarily sustainable. Some of them have switched to informal sectors like restoration and services, but their working conditions are really very tough. And also the fact that circular migration in a region like Souss Messa in the south of Morocco emerged as one of the very prized alternatives to local agricultural work. So a lot of women, with the help of the National Agency for Employment, managed to get contracts to work in Spain. that is a scheme that is already established, but with the lack of opportunities, more and more women are willing to go to Spain and work in the agricultural field in Andalusia. But the issue is that with these women migrating abroad, there has been a lot of effects on their own families. Why is this? It's because in societies like ours, that are traditional, the role of the woman has always been of the one taking care of the family. And now, because they are going to work abroad and they are the own providers for the family, they found themselves also victims of violences when they come back to to Morocco. First of all, they are in so many contexts forced to give money for the man, because he's taking care of the family and he will not accept to work without being rewarded. And also there has been a lot of testimonials among these women of the fact that when they came back, they found out that their families are not necessarily functioning like before, like it used to be before. They also found that their husbands had affairs with other women when they were absent and working for 6 months or 7 months in Spain. And also there has been instances of the degradation in the level of schooling of their own kids, because the absence of the women can have really profound impact on the cohesion and on the structure of the family. Also, as I mentioned, the climate consequences on the local population could also touch to the perspectives of employability for the men themselves. The issue is that most of the people who work, for instance, in the agricultural sector in Morocco, they are low qualified. So even the alternatives to be absorbed in other sectors, they are very limited. And I would like to mention that in Morocco, about 200,000 work position was actually lost in 2024, and more than 80% of them was in the agricultural sector because of the of droughts, because of the lack of water. So people are really losing the only sector in which they had an advantage of working because of the experience. So I think that really it's about employability, it's about the cohesion of the family, and it's about increasing the vulnerability of given categories like women.
Thank you so very much, Amal. Andrew, I'd like to turn to you once again. First of all, the question posed by Abebo in the audience that relates to a comment, Amal, you already made in your presentation about the difficulty to include people displaced due to climate change in the categorization of refugees. So that is the first question posed by the audience to you, Andrew. What is UNHCR's official stance on that? Does the category of climate refugee exist? Will it exist? And secondly, I would like to include a question to you. How can we effectively ensure that the voices of displaced people are included in policymaking processes, thinking of the interventions by Opportuna and Desiree and the importance to really understand local context in order to find adequate solutions? The floor is yours, Andrew.
No, well, thanks. Well, a question which we often get is the whole issue of climate refugees, and no, it doesn't exist, and it won't exist. It'll exist in people talking about it, but the element of a refugee means that somebody's crossing an international border. The vast majority of people that have been displaced by extreme weather events are generally internal. And then if you look at the overall geopolitical level of tolerance for changes in expanding protection, reality, it's not going to change. And so it would also be very difficult to ascertain who is actually in need of international protection when people cross the border. And what is it? Is it based on conflict, persecution? Is it livelihoods? Is it what is actually driving people to cross the border? As I said at the very start, there's not necessarily a direct link between climate and displacement. There is a link between livelihoods. There's a link between access to healthcare. There's a link to deterioration of governance. There's much as there's like a situation where we've got to look at the underlying reasons for why somebody's left and whether it's amounts to persecution, discrimination. The same thing when anyone moves. When people cross from Afghanistan to Pakistan at the moment, is it due to climate change? Is it due to economic factors? Is it due to potential recruitment by the Taliban? So it's not, there's no clear case, but it could all be woven in together. So what we have been focusing on is ensuring that those people in need of international protection are protected. And so that might involve regional instruments, it might involve international instruments, it might involve national agreements. So we will provide our good officers to governments who require it, who ask for it. And this is one of the key elements which is now being discussed within our executive committee in terms of what does displacement mean? People were mentioning in terms of migration. Should we have more robust migration pathways in order to provide protection? Should we have complementary pathways? So there's a lot of discussions going on, but it's not necessarily within the refugee context. And when it comes down to it, we need to ensure that refugee protection, which is of people who are forced to flee across an international border due to conflict and persecution, discrimination, that's protected. We don't want to see that watered down one bit. In terms of ensuring displaced people participate in international fora, I also mentioned that we've got to move beyond participation and actually get their engagement in decision making. And the whole issue of localization in terms of making sure that money gets to where it's required is also important. There was some figures that were bandied around in COP29, which said that only 10% of the funding that gets to capitals in fragile and conflict-affected states actually gets to the community level. So where does it go? So in many aspects, it's not necessarily we need more money. We need more money to be accountable and to get to where it's required. And so that's the type of things. It's the impact, the accountability, which is super important. And one of the key elements in terms of ensuring the accountability and impact is making sure that people on the ground are involved in the discussions, are involved in the decision making. And it can't also just be heads of communities. The heads of the communities or the men are often not the best reflection of what's required. You need to be talking to the women. You need to be talking to the youth. If we look at pastoralists in many areas, the carrying capacity of land means that pastoralism will no longer be able to accommodate the populations that will exist in the future. And so populations will have to move. There will be increased urbanization. So a lot of focus has to be on developing the infrastructure and services in these centres. One thing which I found when I talk to various groups is that, and look at pastoralists, the men might want to keep their affiliation, their cattle, their camels. But if you talk to the women and the children, they're saying, hell no, we want to go to a city. We want to have access to better healthcare. We want to go to school. We want to have a different future. So it's really important that we just don't say, talk to a leader or a key informant and say, that's what the community wants. It's not. You need to go to the back of the tent, we would describe it, and see what are those people who are not normally able to speak, what is it that they wish? So I'll just leave it at that. Over.
Thank you so very much, Andrew. We have 3 questions by Mary Cetrana in the chat, and I will leave the last one for last and try to combine the other 2 in my questions to Opportuna and Desiree. Opportuna, Mary is asking us whether we can share any experience on how human activities on the one hand and government policies on the other also increase climate-induced displacement? Maybe I can pose that question to you in combination with the question how government and organizations, especially in the Global South, can balance humanitarian responses to displacement with sustainable environmental policies. The floor is yours, Opportuna.
Thank you, Feline. Let me start with Mary's question. I think when we talk of core causes, we are not separating the factors, they are actually interacting. And I think the biggest challenge is we should probably try to rank them, like which one affects more. If I look at the case of the Maasai nomadic pastoralists that I presented, it's very much clear that the acts of the state on the ground, and that means the policies, conservation policies, promotion of tourism at the expense of the pastoral community, but also promotion of agriculture at the expense of pastoral and large-scale investment, have all contributed as drivers, but also we can't ignore the fact that pastoralists, cattle, and I've also looked at the population is also growing in areas like Ngorongoro, where I think it's kind of limited. But what I said is that we don't see a study that will warrant the acts that the government has done there, which could be more, I think, accepted by the community, even the community outside, like researchers, to know, yes, there is this study which was done this way and it shows this. I think the manner in which the relocation took place is where the challenge is. And even the pastoralists are talking about lack of participation. And I think Andrew has insisted on fully participation. And I'm talking of co-designing of intervention and adaptation and mitigation with those who are displaced, or those who are affected or vulnerable, because they have some of the practices that are working, but they're lacking support from the policy level. And I showed this for those in urban areas, how they actually maintain their social system and support each other for those who are not able to get job in the urban area. So if we can use the existing kind of local indigenous way of supporting each other, that will even be more accepted. And even for the pastoralists in the area where they were relocated, I don't think they are refusing to be relocated, but they wish it could be more open and more voluntary and choice of places to go, not just one place where probably they're going to be crowded there. Already there are issues that some of them have arrived there and have left because of no enough land for grazing and other factors. So that said, let me go to the second question. Yes, this is the case that I see that we are struggling with, the refugees along the Western Tanzania, which has been it's supposed to be a temporary phenomenon, but I don't think it is a temporary, even though we are using camps, because some of them have stayed for a very long time, more than 10 years. But we have also the Burundians who are coming and going, so and it's likely to be continuing. I think you are aware of the fresh conflicts now in Congo. So that region, I think, has been having a history of displacement coming and going since 1959, before even Tanzania got independence. And I think when they talk, and probably I'll have a question to Andrew later, when we talk to the refugees, the problems are core again. There is the conflict, and fear of persecution. There is also discrimination. But again, there are also issues of economic. For example, if someone cannot get back their land and they're forced maybe to join a certain political party to be able to access your land back when we ran as a refugee, that is becoming an economic plus a political persecution. So we are arguing, so I think we put on the word sustainable, durable solution to try and open up the box of just refugees in the conflict context and look at how the conflict resulted into something else today, which is making these people not able to return because of the economic reasons. But I think the point that I'm linking with climate change is where, because they have stayed for a long time and they are staying in the camps and they're getting support, but not energy support. They're using the forest for firewood, but sometimes together, I'm not saying just refugees alone, with the local communities. Some have opened farms in the middle of forest. Some will cut trees for selling in charcoal. And this, there's no collaboration. I don't see collaboration. When I talk to the actors on the ground, they will talk like, oh, issues of climate change are under the vice president, not the Minister of Home Affairs. So, and then of course, but we have NGOs and organizations that are getting fund for environment, and they focus only inside the camp. So it's just to widen up and think of the Burundi, Tanzania, and also camp and host community as an ecosystem, and these people depend on each other, and they do sort of livelihood that are supporting each other, and be able to see how can this kind of ecosystem support them for a longer time, because I think there's a danger that they will be displaced again because the environment does not support them now. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Opportuna. We're running almost out of time, but we'll probably run about 5 minutes over. And everyone is welcome to stay as long as they can. The last question by Mary was how we can build partnerships to address the issue at hand on different levels, right? Globally, nationally, but also regionally. And I wanted to ask Desiree very, very briefly in the minutes that we have left, from your experience in Dominican Republic, how can, for example, small island states in the Caribbean who are overproportionally affected by climate change better work together? And this is a difficult question because you've shown us with the example of Dominican Republic that there is a certain denialism still going on in some cases. But how can they work together to position themselves globally so that the issue can receive the due international attention and support? Desiree, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's a general concern of the leadership that was that took place in Cartagena and in the last COP. What are the partnerships that we have at hand to support the joint work conducted? And we should recognize that we only have one planet, and that's the challenge we always have. It's undeniable that we have bad results. What are the losses generated? But still, state agencies are isolated from the civil society, and they're linked to their interests. But we do have demanding communities. They say that they need to implement partnerships, to create more partnerships. If we see what's happening in Dominican Republic, we see that agreements are being subscribed separately from from Haiti, with whom we share the island. And in the case of our research networks or work networks, we are working with other universities or the Caribbean universities in Jamaica, St. Kitts, etc. But however, we do not have any partnership with companies, with government structures. However, I still insist that we have to conduct a joint work with all those academic agencies within the government, from the civil society, and now communities have also the need for raising their voices, because they have to be autonomous as demanding citizens. This was already suggested during the third consultation. We know that Dominican Republic, in the case of refugees, has a long resistance to include other reasons. And every time we say there are displaced, they say, here we don't have any violent acts. We are a democratic state. We are safe. So they think we don't have those problems regarding displacement conceptualization. So it's important to continue acting by creating partnerships such as our chairs, so that we extend our reach to university spaces, to research institutes, etc. Because, you know, it's not only having resources, it's transforming practices vis-a-vis the corporations, the business, the market, and the affected populations.
So much, Desiree. With that, I will very briefly answer the third question Mary posed, which was on how we can advance data collection and large-scale data collection. And I think just very briefly from our experience working together, and a big shout out once more to IDRC, working together with the chair in Peru, Mexico, and Ethiopia, we're currently working on a project looking at factors that determine both mobility and immobility. And we also incorporate questions on climate change and extreme weather. And I think here mixed methods are so essential to, on the one hand side, really collect the big N data, the survey data, but then go into the field, right? Amal, Desiree, you were talking about this, because we cannot get at causality and at all these indirect consequences and impacts on social cohesion, on families, only through survey data, right? We need to go get our boots dirty and understand what is going on. And then maybe based on such comparative study, come up with new categories and probably ways of measuring, right? What stands or what lies behind these processes. But there's a lot to be done. And with that said, I would like to thank our panelists for the excellent presentations and contributions. I would like to thank our audience and once again the IDRC and LERRN for organizing the event. And I wish you all a wonderful Thursday morning, afternoon, wherever you may be. Thank you.